Howdy folks, welcome back. Stories around the campfire here with Clay Steele. And I know it's been a while since we've heard from Thomas Robinette. Well, kind of got a treat tonight. Got another nice story from Joe Flippo. And it's Thomas Robinette once again. He's a Dogman hunter at this point. So get yourself seated. I prefer popcorn and a cold drink at this point in the game. And we're going to go ahead and get started here. Well, this is a prologue, and that's just a good place to start. Well, the rain isn't going to let up anytime soon, thought Thomas. He was miserable. It was a brutal 41 degrees Fahrenheit with 100% humidity. He was stuck in a dripping pop tent that he didn't remember to put the rain cover on, and most of his gear was still in his truck about 3 miles from his current location in southeast Texas. The weatherman said that he still had another 8 days before it rained on him. Now, if he was wrong as often as that weatherman, people would call him a fraud. Well, some already do anyway, Thomas thought. His only comfort was in his companion, Jake. No matter how miserable Thomas found himself, the mottled Australian shepherd pup was always able to bring a smile to his face. And since his divorce, he had leaned on Jake for companionship, confidence, and character. Jake was an angel covered in fur. The pup was one of only a few things he owned that he loved. Over the last year, Thomas had been wrecked both emotionally and financially. It was just a little over 12 months ago that everything went bad for him. He remembered it all clearly as he lounged in this damp tent of his. It all started with a hunting trip, no different than any of the past hundreds of trips he'd taken during his lifetime. Just like so many other last events in life, Thomas didn't know that this hunt would be a life-changing event. Had he known, he may have chosen to stay home that day, hunt somewhere else, or just go fishing off his backyard pier. He packed all of his things the night before bow season opened. He aired out his hunting clothes and scented them with fox urine to cover his odors. Next thing he did, he finished fletching his arrows. He waxed his sinew bowstring. He rubbed bear fat along his 150-pound traditional longbow, and took time to stretch out that new pair of moccasins that he'd made from last year's doeskin for the stock this year. After that, he took the time to resharpen his obsidian knife blade that he carried on his belt. His preparation ritual, as it always had been, was a way for Thomas to stay rooted in his family traditions, and it helped him feel connected to the ancestors. Now, Thomas loved making his own hunting equipment. In his mind, there was nothing more satisfying than going out in nature, picking up rude, raw materials, and making precise equipment that allows a man to provide for himself. He had a traditional Cherokee longbow, arrows made with river cane that were fletched with turkey tail feathers, and hand-knapped obsidian arrowheads that he had made himself. He carried his arrows in a traditional woven quiver that hung down by his side instead of hanging across his back. He couldn't help but to think about how perfect everything seemed to be in his world when he jumped into his old 1984 Dodge, 150 4x4 that morning, several hours before sunrise. Thomas made it to his hunting area within his normal pre-dawn time. He found a honeysuckle vine that was growing around some hedge bushes that he crawled into. He waited for dawn to break. He enjoyed using this location because it was the perfect spot to begin his stalking when the hunt began. Now, many men enjoyed sitting in a tree stand and waiting for their game to come to them. Not Thomas. He stalked his quarry, made an ethical kill, and returned home all in the same stalking journey. He loved it. It was what separated true hunters from those who just harvested an animal. Thomas stopped thinking about the past long enough to pull the tent's rain cover out of his pack, exit the tent, and secure it tightly in place so that no more rain could enter his tent. Now, Jake, as lovable as ever, saw him open up his pack and begin begging for the beef jerky strips that his nose told him that Thomas packed the night before. Those large, piebald eyes were more than Thomas could resist, so he opened up the jerky and gave Jake a large strip. He opined that Jake would wrestle with the piece long enough for him to relax just a little bit. While he was beginning to slip back into his memories, he heard a low, guttural grunt outside his tent. The rain had slacked up in the past hour, just in time for nightfall to catch him and his canine companion out in the forest at late dusk. Jake had stopped chewing on the jerky as the two heard another low growl. This time, it sounded quieter, but closer. Around his tent, he heard the sound of heavy footfalls. He wondered who was stomping around his tent. Anxiety grew deeply inside his gut, and he began to rise to the top of his head as he saw the imprint of hands pressing in front from the top of the tent. He counted 6 hands. There were 3 pairs of the largest hands that he had ever encountered. Next, he heard giggling like an elementary school girl who had just received an ice cream cone. After that, the hands disappeared, and before he could do anything else, a hand ripped through the thin fabric of the tent and snatched Jake right out of the tent through the hole it had created. All Thomas could do was scream in horror, so scream he did. The next thing Thomas was aware of was Sarah's voice calling his name, shaking him awake. "Tom," she called to him, "wake up, it's just another dream." Thomas was shaken as his consciousness returned to him. He found himself sitting up in his bed. He was safe. He was home. He really didn't have an Australian shepherd named Jake, and he didn't lose him to a booger. Laying in the floor beside his bed was the loyal white shepherd, Jack. Jack whined and put his forepaws up onto the bed on Thomas's leg to comfort him. Thomas unconsciously rubbed the large canine's ears and ruffled the top of Jake's head. "Sarah," Thomas answered his wife, "I'm awake now. Thank you for pulling me out of that one. It never gets easier, even though it's a reoccurring dream." "Well, that's why I'm here, sweetheart," Sarah stated. "It's my job to help you when you need it, whether it's during the day or past midnight. However, if you're awake in the woods after midnight, you're on your own with those monsters." "Oh, don't call them monsters. That's just what they were made to be," Thomas said. "They're apex predators and opportunistic hunters. I couldn't fault them for wanting an easy meal. They're no more monsters than a grizzly bear or a cougar." "Well," Sarah began, "let's just make sure that you're never one of their easy meals." "Rest assured, wife of mine, I'm too tough and salty to be very appetizing meal for anything other than maybe a buzzard. And even they will puke me back up if that time ever comes." Sarah smiled at Thomas and snuggled deep into his embrace as she laid there listening to his breathing return to that rhythmic cadence of slumber. Once again, the love of her life was safe, asleep, and at ease. These nights were becoming less and less frequent these last couple of years, but Sarah did know that these were the results of horrible things that Thomas had witnessed, but cataloged somewhere deep within his mind's dark closet, never to be talked about again. She knew that underneath his rough and ready demeanor, he was just a normal man. He had his fears, his dreams, and his failures as well as his successes. What made her love him so much was the fact that he didn't allow those negative things to spill out into their marriage. And he also didn't take out any frustration on their boys. As she fell back to sleep, her last thoughts were that her man was a good man. Chapter 1. "Daddy, that thing's back in the window," 5-year-old Todd Sanders yelled to his father in the next room. Not again, Dad thought. It's the third time this week. Monsters, monsters, monsters. That boy is always seeing monsters. In the trees by his swing set and against his windows at night, he's always crying monsters. Go back to sleep and it'll go away, his father answered. This one is different, Daddy. It has a snout like a dog, retorted Todd. I'd better be there when I get there this time, boy, his father answered with annoyance. The father stepped into his son's room. He figured his son just wanted to watch the rest of the recorded Braves game with him. Nothing in his 33 years had prepared him for what he saw in the open window. A long, hairy arm was reaching into the room towards his young son. He screamed in terror and threw the hot coffee that was in his mug onto that arm. The creature screamed in pain and withdrew its arm, taking the glass pane from the window with it. The man grabbed his son by his pajama shirt and dragged him into the living room as he yelled for his wife to bring him his shotgun. His wife grabbed her son as his father yanked the gun from her hand and ran outside to face the creature. Bang, bang, bang! 3 high-powered shots fired from the shotgun. There was a loud roar. There was a loud crash on the porch. The front door exploded open as Todd's father entered the house covered in blood gushing out of his chest, where 4 deep and wide gashes were running down his body under his shredded t-shirt. All he could say was that it was not a bear. 15 minutes later, the yard was filled with strobing lights. Patrol vehicles from the sheriff's office, along with ambulance lights, lit up most of the yard. Patrolmen from the sheriff's office and the county seat were walking the yard, calling out to any would-be attacker to surrender, as paramedics worked to stabilize the father's wounds before transporting him to the nearest hospital. That was no damn bear, Todd's father kept yelling. That was no damn bear. Todd's mother tried unsuccessfully to console her husband. Nothing that she did seemed to penetrate his emotional distress. The scariest part of this night wasn't that her son was almost snatched by some unknown thing, which was terrifying in itself, but that her husband, her Superman, was so animately persistent in his "that wasn't a bear" statement. Her husband had hunted and dealt with bears during his past. The black bears in middle Alabama weren't as aggressive as grizzlies or Kodiaks, but they had a temperament of their own. Usually, when they were seen, it was because they were crashing through the underbrush to avoid a hunter. Whatever this thing was, had to be different. This thing was something more malevolent than bear. Todd's mother was convinced that there was no way a bear would act in this manner, not those that she knew from this area anyway. That left her with the question of what was out in the woods. Now, the tree line was only a few feet from Todd's room. Todd had mentioned many times about his friend in his window at night. She and her husband had always thought it was just an imaginative child trying to get back out of bed at night. However, tonight was a game changer. Something big had invaded their safe space, tried to steal their son, and almost killed her husband. There was no way that she and Todd were staying in that house alone tonight. She couldn't call her parents either because they were on their anniversary cruise to the Bahamas. She only had one choice. She and Todd would spend the night in the hospital waiting room, where at least they would be safe in the middle of town. Well, when the paramedics finally stabilized her husband, Todd's mother asked if she and Todd could ride to the hospital with her husband. Now, unfortunately, the paramedics stated that it was against company policy, so she would have to drive there herself. Now, she couldn't drive. In her condition, she didn't have the mental capacity to focus on the road, even if she were to have her driver's license. She explained to the paramedics that she just couldn't drive. Well, a nearby sheriff's deputy heard her admit that she couldn't drive because of health issues, so he offered to carry her and her son to the hospital. and he played music on his radio to help ease the tension. And it almost worked. Just as the emotional waves were calming down, something huge jumped into the middle of the two-lane county road in front of the patrol vehicle. The officer instinctively swerved to miss the creature, only to crash his patrol vehicle into a tree on the right side of the road. Exactly what happened next isn't known. Later, little Todd would state that long, hairy arms reached into the front side windows and pulled his mother and the officer from the patrol vehicle while they were trying to exit the vehicle. He said that what followed was a lot of gunshots, growling, the sounds of flesh ripping, and the screams of his mother and the officer. Other long arms tried to snatch him from the rear seat where he was cowering in the floorboards, but the window cages prevented the arms from reaching to him. Now, he also stated that his friend from the bedroom window arrived and fought with the creatures that snatched his mother and the officer. He knew that it was his friend because he smelled him, and then he heard him humming. Humming was a common thing he did through the window every night while Todd went to sleep. No matter who asked Todd or how they asked him, his story stayed consistent. The sheriff, Waylon Thompson, had no clue as to how to handle this situation. When he gave the details to the sergeant of the state police, the sergeant quietly told him to not mention anything bizarre, as it would cause some public panic. He also mentioned that re-election was coming up at the end of the year, and nobody was going to trust a sheriff who saw monsters. Sheriff Thompson needed a plan. He took the fact that it was his job to protect and serve his fellow citizens seriously. Well, this was different, however. He couldn't just pick up the phone and call in the special forces to come and clean up this mess for him. Or could he? It was then that he remembered listening to YouTube podcasts about people who were guests of some of his favorite podcast hosts. He searched through his favorite podcasts. Well, there was the Sasquatch Chronicles, the Sasquatch Theory, and Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio. None of them seemed to fit what was reported. Those kind of dealt with Bigfoot and other forest giants. What he was dealing with was something different, more malevolent. Well, let's see, he thought. There's Dixie Cryptid. Maybe old Cameron Buckner knew something that would help him. Wait a minute, he said aloud to himself. What was the name of that podcast I started listening to? He continued, and then he answered. Oh yeah, it's The Hidden Corners. What was the name of that guy on there who hunted down those Dogmen a couple years ago? As Sheriff Thompson sat at his desk scrolling through his YouTube subscriptions, his phone rang. On the other end of the line was his pre-teenage daughter, Katie. She had that unnerving ability to call at the weirdest of times to ask him the craziest questions. This time, he decided not to ignore her phone call and answered it on the second ring. Hey, Daddy, she chirped in her perpetually optimistic voice. What's going on, sweetheart? He asked her. Dad, I just got through listening to a great podcast playlist on the Hidden Corners page. There was a whole playlist on there about a man named Thomas Robinette. He started out watching Sasquatches down here close to us, over there in Mississippi State. Then he was hired by an international company who hunts down other cryptids. It was amazing. Katie stopped just long enough to catch her breath. Thomas Robinette, Sheriff Thompson exclaimed. Sweetheart, when I get home, I'm taking you shopping. With that, he hung up the phone and called his secretary into the office. Chapter 2. The Katon family. Well, they were enjoying Easter afternoon festivities. Randall and Christy were sitting and talking to her father as the three grandkids were inside, waiting for the grandmother to hide their Easter eggs. Tammy, she was age 16, and their aunt, and Jeremy, age 23, their special needs uncle, and Tammy's brother, were anxiously waiting for Meemaw to finish her tasks so that they could race to find the golden egg with the prized $10 bill inside. The three grandkids, Eric, Aiden, and Dillard, were looking out the window in hopes of catching a glimpse of where their grandmother, Carly, had hid that prize egg. After Carly finished hiding the eggs, she opened the back door and announced that the children could come out to hunt the eggs. Then Carly returned to the pavilion and joined her husband, daughter, and son-in-law. The sun had just begun its slow descent towards the horizon when the children began their hunt. The normal squeals and exclamations as the children hunted and found hidden eggs were floating in the background as the older couple enjoyed the family time. It had been a hard year, but this Easter had been a festive time of relaxation, routine, and familiarity that helped cement the family ties. "Where's Jeremy?" Carly called out to Tammy as she noticed that he wasn't among the group. "Well, he went up in the woods to see if he could find any eggs over there," Tammy answered. "Well, go get him and tell him that I didn't hide any in there," Carly called back. After about 3 minutes, Tammy exited the woods and ran up to her mom. "I can't find Jeremy," she exclaimed. I've even looked over in the corral and the feed pen." "Well, we need to get everybody to come help us find him," Carly stated as she turned and called her husband, Christy, and Randall over. And after explaining to the other adults that Jeremy was missing, Carly and her husband, Ted, began searching the yard and the house while Randall and Christy began walking the trail behind the house, calling out for Jeremy to come to them. The longer they went without a response, the higher their anxiety grew. Jeremy, usually a meek and lovable young man, he just wasn't prone to running off. In fact, when given the choice, he would choose to run inside his room, close the door, and hide in his closet whenever he felt threatened. Today was different. It wasn't inside the house where Carly expected to find him. Neither was he in the yard. Well, the anxiety began to build as she realized that he wasn't in the close proximity of the house inside the woods either. Frantically, she called 911. She was just about to report to the dispatcher that her son was missing when she heard her eldest daughter scream in anguish. Her husband entered and told her that Christy had found Jeremy. His expression told her it wasn't good and that they had lost their son. Christy had found her brother in an old barn farther down the trail, or what was left of him. When she and Randall opened the door of the old barn, what they found was dismembered pieces of her brother thrown all around the barn. He had been torn to shreds by some unknown creature in a savage way that was also quiet enough that the family didn't hear it from mere yards away. The manner of which the attack was perpetrated was obviously brutal. Carly could hear Christy's anguish-filled cries from where she was inside the house. When the dispatcher answered, Carly's voice cracked with emotion. Reality hadn't seeped into her soul yet, but it wasn't far behind. Her heart was racing, and she was sweating. Her breathing was shallow and fast. "Send the sheriff!" Carly screamed into the phone. "Something has killed my son!" Sheriff Waylon Thompson wasn't having a good day. All week, the mayor of their county seat had been pressing him for updates on what really happened 2 weeks ago up at the Sanders home on the outskirts of town. Little Todd Sanders was an orphan now, and on top of that, one of his deputies had little Todd in his care when something, a monster with hairy arms and big teeth according to the only traumatized witness, wrecked the patrol vehicle while the deputy was driving. It, or they, that evidence was inconclusive, proceeded to pull the deputy and little Todd's mama from the patrol vehicle and devour them right there on the spot with little Todd cowering in the rear floorboard, haphazardly, safe from what had attacked the patrol vehicle. The poor little guy would have both physical and emotional scars from the experience that no grown man could recover from. The patrol car wouldn't survive. This was a headache for the insurance company. Sheriff Thompson was just sitting there trying to find information on Thomas Robinette through the outdated NCIS system when his phone rang. He saw that it was the dispatcher. He hesitantly picked up the phone, afraid of what may be waiting on him at the other end of the line. "Yes, Gertie," he answered. "What can I do for you now?" "Sir, it's Carly Warren on the phone. You're needed out at the Katon farm over on County Road 47. Someone or something just killed the Warren's son, Jeremy, and Carly Warren's asked that you come out there as soon as possible, or even faster if you can." "What the—" Sheriff Thompson began. "Send out 2 of our closest deputies now and tell her I'll be on my way." He called his investigators and sent them out ahead of him as he collected his thoughts. Now, Waylon Thompson knew this was going to be a long night, and it was Easter, too. There was no way he was going to get himself home in time for Margaret's Italian sausage goulash that she was preparing for supper. He'd been the one to ask her to make it, too. He lit his last cigar, picked up his Marlin 45-70, grabbed a bandolier of shells, and half ran out the door. The Warrens were his lifelong friends. Margaret used to babysit Jeremy so that the couple could have a break from time to time. And now this. As the sheriff drove over to the Katon farm, his phone rang. He looked down and saw that it was his daughter calling him again. He didn't have time to deal with any frivolous questions right then, so he swiped off the call. A quarter-mile down the road, his phone rang again. It was his daughter again. Again, he hung up the phone. As he turned onto the gravel road leading up to the Katon farm, the tires crunching on the gravel held an ominous whisper. All traces of normality seemed to disappear within the crunching sounds. Many times he and his family had driven down this same driveway for festivities. Today, everything would change forever. The scene at the Katon farm was chaotic, to say the least. The family was being sequestered at the pavilion with the sheriff's detectives, while trained dogs searched for any scent that were willing to follow. Sheriff Thompson's own deputies had shown up on force and were canvassing the area. He noticed that each one of them held a tactical shotgun. A couple even had personal firearms used to take down big game. The sheriff waved off questions from his subordinates until he approached the Warrens and spoke to them. He listened quietly as Carly Warren told him what happened from her perspective. And as she spoke, he took notes in his scribble pad when she said something that he wanted to check out later. He could tell that his family friends were still in shock, broken-hearted, and telling the truth. At his request, the investigators wrapped up their questioning for the time being and allowed the family their time to grieve. Once again, the phone rang. It was Katie. He answered the phone with frustration and began to scold her for bothering him while he was working. "But, Daddy," she said, "I found Thomas Robinette's phone number." Panic melted to peace with these words. He had a chance to get answers. Hope was rising in his chest. Chapter 3. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes my presentation for today, Thomas said as he wrapped up his lecture on cryptids in North America at the Alabama Bigfoot Symposium. He was preparing his notes to answer questions in the Q&A time to follow his presentation when his public phone rang. Thomas handed his phone to his wife, Sarah, as he began setting up his podium at the after-presentation question and answers portion of the presentation. She answered the phone, took the brief call, and informed the caller that she would have him call back as soon as he finished his symposium. He noticed that she didn't return his phone to him while he answered the multitude of questions fired politely at him from his interested audience. Subconsciously, Thomas knew that the phone call was significant. The fact that Sarah didn't give him back his phone meant that she wanted him to focus on answering the questions without being distracted. Thomas put the call out of his mind and did his best to answer each question. However, in the back of his mind, he couldn't put that phone call away. Thomas asked Sarah about the call as he began cleaning up his podium. It had been a long week for the both of them, and he was glad it was finally over. And during the Q&A session, he repeatedly looked over at Sarah, his eyes asking about the call without him saying a word. Each time, she just shook her head sideways and encouraged him to just keep going. And finally, he had finished his obligatory session and was ready to call it an evening. "Well, who was that on the phone earlier, Sarah?" Thomas asked his wife. "Why, it was Sheriff Waylon Thompson from Walker County, Alabama," Sarah answered. "He said that he'd heard about you from the Hidden Corners podcast on YouTube, and he seemed pretty adamant about needing to talk to you. He said that he had something killing people in his county, and he didn't know who else to contact. He didn't know what it was. He stated that it killed like a large dog, but the footprints, they were almost human-like mixed with the big dog. It seems that whatever it is has killed 6 people, including 3 of his deputies, and who knows how much livestock in the last month. The county's commission is on his back about providing them updates and answers that he just doesn't have. He stated that he needs you to call him." Okay, Thomas said. Let's go get something to eat and I'll call him after supper. I'm hungry and I can't think straight on a grumbling stomach. Well, dinner was pleasant. Consisted of catfish fillets fried in Cajun pepper seasoning, slaw, hush puppies, fried okra, and potato salad, washed down with Southern-style sweet tea. Thomas and Sarah were stuffed when they entered their hotel room. After they took a shared shower and got dressed for bedtime, Thomas called the number on his phone. "Sheriff's office," an uninterested voice answered from the other end of the phone. "Hello," Thomas answered. "This is Thomas Robinette. Sheriff Thompson asked me to return his call." Immediately, the voice changed from disinterest to full attention. Yes, sir," the female voice returned. "I'll transfer you to him immediately." After just a couple of clicks and 10 seconds of elevator music, Sheriff Thompson picked up the phone. "Mr. Robinette," the voice began, "I'm Sheriff Waylon Thompson. I sure hope you can help me." "Well, Sheriff, I'm willing to listen to you, but I don't know if I can help you until you tell me what's going on down your way." For the next 2 hours, Sheriff Thompson relayed the facts of the situation to Thomas. And when he'd finished, the sheriff asked Thomas if he'd had any experience that would allow him to guess what the heck it could be attacking people and livestock in his county. Thomas answered with one word as a grimace crossed his face. "Dogman," he stated. Three weeks earlier. Sitting inside his den, the alpha dogman was not happy. He had spent time and effort trying to lure people into the forest so that his pack could hunt them. Nothing had worked. Ever since he led his pack away from his alpha and the face eaters way up north and to the west, he had nothing but bad luck. The initial success that he had was only in leading his pack of wolf warriors to snatch willing mates before they ran for their freedom. Since then, it had been a subsistence living, mainly hunting the lone humans that entered whatever territory that they happened to temporarily hold until the humans drove them away. And he was tired of running. If he doesn't establish a permanent territory soon, even his most loyal followers will begin to doubt his leadership abilities. This southern forest seemed to be ideal. Traveling southeast seemed to have been a good idea. Thus far, he and his pack had been successful in their hunts. No one has even ventured close to their current cave lair. See, the limestone mountains where they were hidden were riddled with caves and crevasses. He had learned early to send others ahead of him just in case the floors were thin and collapse under their weight. But the current domicile was a stable. The area was mostly clean except for the feeding area where they left their remaining pieces of the last meal for later. The cave was beginning to smell, but the aroma wasn't unpleasant to the apex predators who lived there. Darkness began to fill the cave as Alpha called his pack together. "Tonight we hunt," he bellowed. Obediently, his pack followed him outside of the cave. Only those with small pups stayed behind, accompanied by younger males who were tasked with protecting the females and the pups. Once outside the cave, the larger pack broke down into its smaller cliques as the hunters formed small parties. Alpha noticed that as time progressed, less and less of his hunters volunteered to go hunting with him. Tonight, he hoped that this would all change. As darkness fell, he led his 3 companions to a clearing on the south side of the Bankhead National Forest. It was a secluded place where he knew there was an easy meal to be had. The 4 dogmen lay just below the crest of the bluff overlooking the small clearing. Alpha was pleased to see that the old house was still sitting there. The occupants inside were a couple in their 30s and their son. He stumbled across the place a couple of nights ago when he was out on a solo hunt during the last waxing gibbous moon. He'd only made a cursory investigation of the area that night. He had investigated just enough to know that there were 3 people living in the house. The door was flimsy, and it was going to be an easy place to enter. The close space in the living room would work to his advantage if he decided to kill those inside immediately. However, tonight was a full moon, and he was feeding the urge to hunt. He wanted to chase the older ones until they couldn't run anymore. The young one he'd grab first. His terror would make the meal that much tastier, he thought. He looked back over his shoulder at his companions. They were a younger group of dogmen who lacked experience in hunting. And tonight, he planned to build their confidence by allowing them to successfully complete this hunt. The sound of a previously recorded ball game could be heard coming from the front room, and the smell of cooked meat mixed with onions and bell pepper filled the air. Anticipation mounted until he could barely hold in his excitement. A long, loud howl marked the beginning of their nightly hunt. Now, no one inside heard the howl. The television was too loud. Quietly, he led his 3 companions up to the tree line close to the back of the house. Using his nose, he motioned for his brothers in the hunt to surround the house. He was standing in front of the house behind the family vehicle when he heard the child inside yell for his father. Seconds later, he heard his brother yelp. Next, the front door crashed open and the alpha male ran out with a thunderstick. The alpha pointed his thunderstick towards the hunter in back of the house and fired 3 shots before Alpha could reach him. With a mighty blow, Alpha hit the man in his chest with his clawed hand. Instead of falling down, the man managed to hit him with the barrel of his gun and crash back into the house. Alpha knew it was best to go. Past experience had taught him that other 2-leggeds were on their way with their flashing lights, their loud noises, and more importantly, their thundersticks. Well, folks, it's a pretty good start to the next version from Joe Flippo and Thomas Robinette. The Bigfoot Hunter is now hunting Dogman. Kind of sounds exciting, and I know y'all enjoy Joe Flippo's stories. Man, they're exciting, and they're just everything you're looking for in one of these. So join us again next week, and we'll read some more of this great story from Joe Flippo. Until then, have a good one, folks. This is Clay Steele. Good night. Hey folks, Clay Steele here. You know, I spend a lot of time outdoors around this here campfire. If you're like me, you get downright annoyed by all those pesky mosquitoes buzzing around. They're just looking for a free meal. Nothing ruins a good night under the stars faster than slapping and scratching at bites. And that's why I keep the bee itch stop. I keep it handy. One swipe and that itch is gone. No more burning, no more scratching, just good old relief. Made right here in Nevada with all natural ingredients. It's safe for the whole family. So if you're tired of being a mosquito buffet, do yourself a favor and get you some bee itch stop today. And this is Clay Steele. Watch out for them bugs.